Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you end up seeing this. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Again, Dr. Edwin Moreno here from the Human Intelligence Dialogue. I have the pleasure of spending some time here with a former colleague, actually a former boss of mine, one of my favorite bosses, Dr. Steve Swavely, who's here to talk to us about something rather interesting that I hope you will find value add. And maybe if you hadn't thought about it before, this will really percolate and give you some interest to pursuing this a little further or following up with Dr. Swavely here once we get done here. So with that, Steve, thank you so much. I appreciate you spending some time here helping our listeners here to learn to listen and understand some of the work that you're involved in and the research that you're doing. So just so people get a sense of, so who is Dr. Steve Swavely? Tell us a little bit about your journey and your mission, how you got to where you are today and what you've been doing.
Yeah, sure. First, thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. I love talking about this stuff, so I appreciate the invitation. And second, I never tire of hearing I was one of your favorite bosses. So thank you for that. Yeah, my background, I'm a neuropsychologist by training, got my PhD at Georgia State University in clinical neuropsychology. After I got done with my training, I went to the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, South Carolina, where I did clinical work for many, many years at the hospital. And one day, Edwin, the director of my department came to me and he said, "Hey, Steve, I want you to go represent the department in this leadership initiative that the hospital's doing." And I thought, oh, this is, I don't need this added to my plate. I really don't have any interest in this. But, when your boss says, "Hey, I'd like you to represent the department," you don't say no to that, right? So I said, "Sure, absolutely. I'll go and represent the department." Well, and when I fell in love with what I was hearing, because one of the things that I learned in that initiative was that leadership is really about understanding people. And as a neuropsychologist, I knew a little bit about what makes people tick. And so I fell in love with that. I got involved with leadership development at the hospital and did that work for many years. And then a little over, gosh, it's almost close to 20 years now. I'm dating myself a bit. I left the hospital to go do leadership development full time. And that was at what is today known as Truist Leadership Institute. It's evolved into Truist from a small boutique leadership development firm called Farr Associates, which was bought by the bank BB&T, which then, when BB&T merged with SunTrust, became Truist and the Truist Leadership Institute. I was there for 15 years. Not only did I get to work with executives of the bank, but as you well know, because that's where we met, we had the opportunity to work with business clients of the bank as well, helping those companies develop their own leadership capabilities. A little over 2 years ago now, I retired from Truist and started my own practice doing coaching. My company is Evolution Leadership Coaching. And I did one of the things I've wanted to do all my career, and that is I wanted to write a book. And so I wrote a book, Ignite Your Leadership, The Power of Neuropsychology, Optimize Team Performance. And so that's where I'm at today. And this is kind of what I'm doing in retirement is continue to be an advocate for bringing neuropsychology into the leadership realm.
Yeah, Steve, I appreciate that, and you're right. That's where we met. It was a great experience for me, and I had been in the field of leadership development for some time. But when I went to the Truist back then, the BB&T Leadership Institute, and went there to work with you and the colleagues that I made there, it really brought another level that I hadn't thought about as I got involved in there. As you know, one of the things we talked about there was you are how you lead, and we talk about the thumbprints that are put in life for us as kids that later on manifest themselves from a leadership perspective. So glad to, by the way, I recommend anybody to read his book. It's really got some real nice nuggets in there about how neuroscience and neuro leadership is really playing out in the workspace today. So thank you for that, Steve. So let me ask you this. Here we are, fast forward, you're in that sort of pay it forward phase like myself. We've got a wealth of experience and we're continuing to learn because as you know, the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know. So we continue to learn. But what are some, with your reading, research, and speaking with clients and doing work with clients, what are some of the emerging trends you're seeing in the human capital space surrounding the whole neuroscience and neuro leadership area?
Wow. Great question. You know, the first thing that comes to mind, I'm not sure it's an emerging trend as much as it's maybe an expanding trend. And that's this. One of the things that I've learned through my decades of doing leadership development is that that field suffers from two problems. Leadership development suffers from number one, there's a belief that if people know what to do, that they'll actually do it. And we know that that's not the case. Just knowing, for example, the 7 steps to effective delegation doesn't mean that people follow it. Or how to build collaboration. Just because people know from an intellectual standpoint how to do it doesn't mean they don't do it. And that happens because of what you just mentioned. We bring our personality into our leadership. Who you are is how you lead. And you have to be able to merge that personality with the steps, if you will, to being an effective leader. You've got to understand how to merge those two together. The second trend that I see that's expanding is there's a long history of organizations teaching leaders technical skills and neglecting the people skills, neglecting those skills that are required to build relationships. Yet we know that leadership is all about building relationships, getting things done through people by creating those positive relationships. And I think a lot of the trends that are happening today in the workplace, things such as remote work, artificial intelligence, those are all changing the nature of how relationships develop. It's not going to take it away, but it's certainly changing the relationship of how we build those connections with people.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. And as you were talking, you reminded me of one other thing. I also call it the car wash syndrome. If you take a car through the car wash when it's raining, when it comes out on the other side, it's still going to get dirty. And sometimes what I've seen done in several organizations is we got to get leaders trained on X, whatever X is. But when they come out, their accountability mechanisms and their reward mechanisms are still the same for the old behaviors. They haven't looked at it from a holistic perspective. So you're right, Steve. There's some great opportunities there. So
I love that. I love that analogy of the car wash. It's you can't do a one and done with this stuff. It has to be an ongoing learning experience. And a colleague, see if you remember who this colleague was. I bet you do. A colleague once told me that I was explaining to this colleague that the idea that there's this leadership ladder, and the higher you go on the leadership ladder, the more that your faults and your insecurities get exposed. So the more important it is to identify what those are and understand how to manage those faults and insecurities. And this colleague said to me, "Oh, my grandmother told me about that. It's the monkey syndrome." I said, "What do you mean the monkey syndrome?" And he said, the higher the monkey climbs on the ladder, the easier it is to see its butt. Do you remember who said that to me?
no.
That was you, Edwin. You told me that.
Bad memory there.
It is. And then that stuck with me throughout the years that we've known each other. And I sometimes talk about that when I'm doing presentations or I'm working with a client, because I think it's a great visual of what leadership really is. The higher we go on that leadership ladder, the more exposed we are to having our faults sabotage us. And those faults very, very frequently fall into the realm of inabilities to develop relationships. And the technical side of leadership, whatever the technical skills required are to be a leader in whatever industry you're in, they're relatively easy to teach. But those psychological capacities, those what you might call the human intelligent capacities of individuals, are much more difficult to teach and can't be completed with a one and done kind of training session. So I love that idea of the car wash. I'm going to steal that from you as well, if you don't
Take it. I'm
mind.
going to give you one more. By the way, it's so interesting. I said that, and it's so impressive that I forgot it. But here's a better one that I'm using recently, and I think you'll enjoy this one. The other point, and this may be more politically correct. The other one is that as a leader, you become a celebrity, quasi-psychologist, sociologist, and anthropologist. Why do I say celebrity? Because to your point, the spotlight is always on Steve as the manager or the director or the VP. Everybody's watching if your actions align with your behaviors. As a
Yeah,
quasi-psychologist, why? Because you show up to the table with your own insecurities. You're human first before your title, just like I show up with my own insecurities. Does he like me? Do I even want this assignment? Do I like him? Does he appreciate me? Those kinds of things. That's a quasi-psychologist. Sociologist is all about team dynamics, and anthropologist is all about organizational culture. So what people stepping into management don't realize, I'm taking on these additional roles. I may be an engineer, an accountant, whatever, VP of X, but that psychology course I took back in college that I really didn't like because it was too touchy-feely, I'm living that every day of my life. So take that one
yeah,
too and use it wherever you want at
I
the end.
love it. Yes, that concept of what I call executive amplitude. And amplitude is it's a physics term that that relates to the strength of a signal that you give out. And again, the higher you go on the leadership ladder, the stronger that signal is, and the more powerful it is, and the more that people are paying attention to you as the leader. And the things that you do as a leader, the way that you think, the emotions that you show, the culture that you try to create is modeled by the rest of the organization. And so that leadership amplitude is critical, and it requires all of those things that you talked about, right? Being a part psychologist, part anthropologist, it requires all of those skill sets to be able to be a really effective leader.
Yeah, so much so. So, what are some solutions, particularly with your research on neuroscience and neuroleadership, that you're kind of crafting now? What are some tidbits that you would suggest to some of the listeners here? And of course, ladies and gentlemen, we're just giving you the tip of the iceberg here. So, at the end of this, you're going to have Steve's contact information if you want to follow up with him and learn some more.
Sure. Um, well, and I talk about this in my book, Edwin. I've identified 6 arenas, if you will, that are critical for leaders to develop a skill set around as it relates to their people skills, their building their relationship skills. Number one, I call it lead yourself first. You got to understand who you are as a person and what personality you're bringing into your leadership role. What are your strengths and what are your potential blind spots? You got to understand that first. Second, you got to understand how to motivate people. Motivation is key to building a positive environment, and creating that environment also leads to increased motivation and engagement. And knowing what are the things I need to do to create that engaging environment where people are motivated is a critical leadership skill. Number 3, master communication. The ability to communicate effectively is the number one skill set of a leader. Anytime I'm working with a leader that's in trouble, what I hear from their management is he just can't communicate, or she just has problems communicating with her team. And what I find is that it's not so much that the person can't communicate, it's that they don't understand the formula for communication. And neuropsychology has identified a very clear formula about how to communicate. And if you understand that formula, it makes that skill much easier to be able to implement in the real world. Number 4, build collaboration. Most people are surprised to learn that in order to build collaboration on a team, you got to encourage opposition. You got to hear people's perspectives that are maybe different from your own as the leader. And it doesn't mean encourage conflict. There's a big difference between opposition and conflict. But building collaboration means encouraging that opposition and building an environment where they feel free to raise their hand and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is the right path to take. Number 5, fifth area is create change agility. The world is accelerating in how quickly it's changing. I mean, just look at AI as an example. It's completely changing the face of our workplace. And if we don't have a team that can adapt to that change quickly, we're not going to survive. And number 6, and you mentioned this already, managing team dynamics. How do you get through, if you're a leader and you've got 8, 6, 16, however many people on your team, how do you manage the personal dynamics of all those individuals? And I've identified those 6 factors as key factors that if leaders will learn how to implement in the workplace in a very practical way, they'll be very effective. And I've got a chapter in each of those in my book, followed by an exercise in how to actually begin to implement it in your own team. Because going back to one of the issues of leadership development, just because you know something doesn't mean that you'll do it. And the exercises help people implement the things that I'm teaching them in the text of the book.
Awesome. Thank you for those tidbits there. So you've been speaking a little bit about it. So based on what you're reading, seeing out there, working with clients and so forth, the future of work, you alluded to it earlier, AI. By the way, I have a great book I'm going to recommend to you in a little bit. But AI, hybrid remote work, multi-generational, multicultural in the workforce, more globalization, uncertainty, a lot of change, all of those kinds of things. Based on those dynamics taking place, where do you see where neuropsychology can come in and play a part? Or what do you see for that going forward?
Yeah. Oh, I think the answer to that really goes back to how we started this discussion. All of those things are impacting the capacity to build relationships with your team. And humans are social creatures. Our brains are wired for social interaction. Our minds are programmed for social interaction. And building relationships is key to creating a high-performing team. Think about it. Think about the most effective teams that you've ever observed or been a part of. The relationships on those teams were tight relationships. They weren't necessarily relationships that were everybody was everybody's best friend, but they were relationships where people could be honest with each other. They could oppose one another. They knew how to collaborate. They knew how to communicate with each other, and they managed each other's dynamics, if you will, in a way that made the team stronger, not weaker. And so the bottom line is my advice to anybody that is leading a team in this changing world is, number 1 on your survival skills list should be learn how to develop relationships. And I think neuropsychology has a lot to offer in how to help individuals take the building blocks of relationship creation and put it into application in your leadership.
Yeah, you triggered a thought on two fronts. Earlier, you talked about communication, and you know this, but I started in the Air Force doing leadership development. And back then, the major issue was communication. Fast forward to today, you and I both have read the book, The Mind of the Leader, and in there it talks about 8% of leaders are effective listeners and communicators. 8%. So what as things change, they remain the same. That's one piece. But the other piece is that you and I are at a different place now, where I call it the fish tank metaphor, and that is where when we were in corporate America, we were inside that organization, which for me was like a fish tank. But now, as external consultants, we can walk around that fish tank and see the obvious things taking place that sometimes within the organization, because of politics, because of lack of leadership, because of a toxic environment, which unfortunately there's still more out there than need to be, type of things, then that gives us an opportunity to see what they may not see and actually call it out and point out if you do these things a little different, you might get better results at the end of the day. So that's another one you can take with you too, the fish tank metaphor.
I like that. Yeah. The whole idea of a fresh set of eyes that have not been influenced by the existing culture coming in and identifying where the blind spots for this organization, I think is a really important piece for any organization to consider when they're thinking about building their leadership capacity, modifying their culture, creating teams that can move into the next century as high performers. And I'd add that component of listening is so critical. One of the things I love to do when I'm with a group of executives is to talk a little bit about the importance of listening. And I always ask, who in here thinks they're a good listener? And everybody raises their hand, right? Everybody thinks they're a great listener. Yet, to your point, the data say the opposite, that maybe only 8 to 10% of leaders are good listeners. And so if there was one skill, if you said, Edwin, give my listeners one skill that they should develop to build relationships, you nailed it right there. It's all about learning to be a good listener. And that's more than just hearing. It's processing the information, it's being curious about the other person's perspective, and it's a process of what we call active listening, which is reflecting back your understanding of what the other person is telling you. And when you do that, one of two things will happen. They will either say, no, 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 Steve, that's not what I'm trying to tell you. Or they'll say, yeah, that's exactly right. And now you know everybody's on the same page. So
Yeah,
that is a key skill.
yeah, and I'll add to that empathy and compassion, because research has told us that the more people go up in organizations to the senior VP level, executive levels, they start losing their empathy. And empathy is, Steve, I understand. Compassion is, how can I help? So, Steve, one closing takeaway. You've mentioned several of them, but if there's one actionable advice you'd give to managers as we begin to close this out, and hopefully they'll follow up with you afterwards, what would that be?
Yeah, well, I think I've said it already. That number one, if there was just one thing that people took away from this, it's develop your listening skills. And don't just listen to the people above you. You got to listen to the people out parallel. And most importantly, listen to the people that are down there doing the work of the business, because they have information that is so critical and so valuable and is often ignored by senior leadership because they have that CEO disease, right? That they're the last person to hear a problem because nobody wants to take a problem to them. But if we're good listeners in an organization, we can pull that out and we can identify it and address it before it becomes a critical problem in the organization.
Yeah, Steve, this has been really enjoyable, and so much so, I know there's a lot more depth here to get into. If you're open to it, I'd like to invite you back to a second part of this where we can really dig into the whole neuroscience and neuro psychology, as you refer to it, so people can understand, what's really the issue here. Because as you and I know, we spend a lot of time in our mind. We need to make it a safe place, but leaders play an extra role in that place at the end of the day. Emotional contagion and all these other concepts that we didn't have an opportunity to get into here. But hopefully in a part two, we can dig into it a little bit more.
I would love to. Yeah. And I've been very intentional about that term neuropsychology. When I published my book, my publisher said, nobody knows what neuropsychology is. You need to use the term neuroscience. And I was like, I was adamant. I said, no, because you got to understand both. You got to understand the neuro and the psychology. You got to I like to use the analogy of a computer, right? The neuro part is the computer itself, the motherboard, the silicone chips, the processor,
The hardware.
and the psychology is the mind part, right? That's the programming that goes into the computer.
The
And you
software.
got to understand how we're wired and how we're programmed to have a good understanding of what makes people tick. So yes, I would love to have more conversations with you about this.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate it. And to all of you listeners, his contact information will be played at the end of this video. Hopefully this was informative for you. Hopefully it planted some seeds. If anything, percolated your curiosity and go, you know what, I may need to talk to that Dr. Steve again and get a little deeper into it. So I appreciate your time, and I look forward for you coming back and digging more into the neuropsychology as you refer to it, because I think it's important. You're right. The popular term is neuroscience, and you would not believe how many leaders out there aren't even familiar with that or neuro leadership. So the fact of neuropsychology, I'm glad you brought that to the forefront. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I look forward to ours getting together again. Again, his contact information will be posted here at the very end. Also, you can find him on LinkedIn. But what's the name of your organization again, Steve? Let him know.
Yeah, the name of my company is Evolution Leadership Coaching, and it's evolutionleadershipcoaching.com.
Great. Thank
And
you.
as you said, you can find me on LinkedIn. And for your listeners, first consultation, if you get my book, you read my book, and you want some help in applying any one of the chapters in the book, call me. I'll walk you through it. No cost, no obligation. No kidding. I do this because I love it. I'm supposed to be retired. My wife says, Steve, you failed retirement. Well, maybe I have. It's because I love doing this stuff. So for your listeners, I would be happy to do a free consultation with them to help them apply some of the things that they're learning.
I appreciate that. I think it's because we at our age nowadays are reframing retirement. So that's what it is. We're semi-retired, but we
Uh,
continue
I'll
being.
tell my wife that, Edwin.
I appreciate that.